The wind clawed at the outpost like a living thing, rattling every seam in the prefab walls as if trying to peel them away. Evan Parker lay cocooned under his thermal blanket, 12 years old, and already used to the storms that howled across Niflheim. Tonight, though, the noise seemed sharper, more insistent. The reinforced panes at his window trembled, and for a moment he imagined the entire shelter collapsing around him, crushed beneath the endless ice. Beside his bed, Max stirred. The German shepherd lifted his head, ears pricked, muscles taut beneath his thick coat. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Evan groaned, pulling the blanket tighter. Max, it's just the wind, but the dog didn't settle. His eyes were fixed on the door, every fiber of his body alert. That was when Evan heard it too faint but unmistakable. Scratch, scratch, thump. He sat up, pulse quickening. The sound wasn't the storm. It was closer, something pressing against the outpost itself. His mind leapt immediately to Snow Rat's huge, desperate vermin that had learned human shelters meant heat and scraps. They came scratching and gnawing whenever storms drove them to madness. If Max scared one off, maybe he'd get a treat. Evan muttered to himself as he slid into his insulated slippers, trying to sound braver than he felt. The dog bounded ahead, nails clicking against the metal floor, tail stiff. Evan followed, heart hammering. The noise came again, a dragging scrape against the outer wall. He punched in the code, and the lock gave its familiar hiss. At once, the cold hit him like a fist, air so sharp it burned his lungs. Snow whirled in, biting at his face. He blinked through tears, expecting to see the hunched shadow of a rat darting away. Instead, something small and motionless slumped against the wall. His breath caught. A girl, at least he thought she was a girl curled in on herself, arms locked around her knees. Her skin was a luminous azure, so vivid it seemed to glow against the white drifts. Frost clung to her short white hair, and her lips trembled, blue against blue. She looked near death. For a heartbeat, Evan froze. She wasn't human. Her eyes flickered open, glowing pools of cobalt without pupils or irises, and in them he saw not threat but pleading. Max moved first, trotting straight to her side, whining softly. He pressed his body against hers, licking her chilled hands as if to coax life back into them. The girl didn't even flinch, only sagged further against him. Jesus, Evan whispered, breath pluming in the icy air. Panic jolted him into action. He darted forward, hands fumbling against her thin, frost-stiff suit. Even through the strange fabric, her skin was shockingly cold. Come on, inside. Now. She didn't move, too weak or too afraid to obey. Evan's fear turned to something else, sharper and steadier. Compassion, fierce as the storm outside. He slipped his arms under hers and hauled, stumbling backward into the warmth of the outpost. Max pressed at their legs, urging them along. The door sealed behind with a heavy thunk. Shutting out the wind's howl in the sudden quiet, Evan could hear the girl's teeth chattering like brittle glass. He half-carried, half-dragged her toward the couch, his own chest heaving with effort. You're freezing, he muttered, grabbing the thickest blanket he could find and wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. She clutched it instinctively, eyes never leaving his face. For an instant, boy and alien stared at each other. Evan had expected vermin, some scavenger scratching at the walls. Instead, he had opened the door to someone else entirely, a girl who might have died out there in the snow if not for him and his dog. The weight of that realization settled over him like the storm itself, heavy and inescapable. Max curled tight against her side, tail thumping once as if declaring the decision already made. And in that moment, Evan understood, whatever she was, whoever she was, he couldn't let her die. The storm had quieted to a dull roar against the outpost walls by the time. Sarah Parker pushed through the entry, stamping snow from her boots. The blast of cold air followed her in, scattering flakes across the floor before the door slid shut again. She shrugged off her fur-lined coat, exhaustion etched into the lines around her eyes, running the thaw until the small hours had made her tough. But tonight she carried an edge of weariness that only Nibelheim could give. She froze when she saw the living room. Her son was crouched by the couch, wrapping blankets around a trembling figure. Max lay pressed against it protectively, brown eyes flicking up at her with the same unyielding loyalty that had carried them through a decade on this frozen rock. Evan James Parker. Her voice was low, the kind of calm that meant trouble. You have exactly 5 seconds to explain why there's a blue-skinned child sitting on my couch. Evan scrambled upright, his cheeks flushed with guilt and adrenaline. Mom, please. She was outside. She would have died. Sarah's gaze flicked to the girl, who clutched the blankets tighter around herself like a shield. Her skin shimmered faintly in the lamplight, that impossible cobalt glowing through patches of frost. Thin shoulders rose and fell with each shallow breath. Sarah saw not just an alien, but a child starving, terrified, and nearly frozen solid. Her hardened expression softened, just slightly. 10 years of survival on Nibelheim had carved away most illusions, but it had never stripped her of compassion. She crossed the room slowly, lowering herself to one knee so her eyes met the girl's. "Hey," she said gently. "I'm Sarah. Can you tell me your name?" The girl's lips parted, but no sound came. Her throat convulsed in frustration. Then, as her eyes glowed brighter, a sudden chill rippled through the room, not air this time, but something deeper, threading into Sarah's mind. Images burst into being, raw and jagged, like shards of broken glass. A village nestled between mountains of ice. Blue-skinned families sharing meals. The thunder of ships blotting out the sky. Insectoid creatures descending, their chitin glinting, weapons spitting green fire. Screams, parents falling. A pod door sealing shut. Tumbling through storm and fire. Crawling from wreckage. Cold, endless cold. Sarah jerked back, hand clapped over her mouth. Her pulse thundered. "Vespids," she whispered. "God help us, those were Vespids." Evan steadied the girl as she slumped, drained from the effort of forcing those memories into minds not her own. His voice cracked as he pleaded. "She's terrified, Mom. Look at her. Please don't make me take her to administration. They'll lock her away." The girl raised her head, eyes wide, and for the first time she spoke aloud, her voice soft but carrying a haunting melody. "Laura." She pressed her palm weakly to her chest. "My name?" "Laura." Evan repeated it quietly, almost reverently. "Laura." Sarah looked between her son and the alien child. She had survived bandits, famine, and the storms of Nibelheim. She had built the only tavern in a colony, scraping by at the edge of the galaxy. She knew the weight of hard choices. But standing there, seeing her son shield this girl with every fiber of his small body, she realized the decision had already been made. "All right," she said finally, pushing herself upright. Her sigh carried both surrender and resolve. "For tonight she stays. But tomorrow we figure out what this means." Relief washed over Evan's face. Max thumped his tail against the couch in agreement, curling closer to Laura as if sealing the pact. Sarah ran a tired hand through her snow-damp hair, muttering more to herself than to them. This changes everything, and she was right. Though none of them could know just how much. The years rolled on like the storms long, punishing, relentless yet in their rhythm, life carved out something resembling normal. Nibelheim had a way of shaping those who dared to call it home. Children grew up faster, adults hardened quicker, and bonds forged in the cold either snapped or became unbreakable. For Evan Parker, it was both curse and blessing that the night he opened his door had defined everything that followed. Laura became part of the family in ways subtle and obvious. At first, she barely spoke, clinging to Max as though the dog were her lifeline. But warmth, food, and time gave her back what trauma had stolen. Sarah taught her how to help in the kitchen, how to fold laundry, how to scrub frost from the air vents when they clogged. Evan taught her the little games kids made up to pass hours indoors when storms raged outside. Slowly, she laughed again, at first awkwardly, then with a sound that filled the tiny prefab home like bells by 16. Evan towered over her, though Laura carried herself with a poise that made her seem older. The outpost had grown into a colony of nearly 200 souls, anchored by the Thaw the Tavern Sarah, built into a cornerstone of survival. It was where miners thawed frostbite with mugs of synth ale, where families traded news, and where Evan and Laura worked side by side. He hauled crates and scrubbed tables. She moved through the crowd with an easy grace that made her luminous skin more wonder than oddity. Not everyone welcomed her. Whispers followed her at first: alien, outsider, reminder of the Vespid Treaty that everyone doubted would hold. But Laura's quiet diligence wore them down. She learned their names, their habits, their stories. If someone staggered and half-frozen, she was the first to shove a blanket into their hands. If children hovered shyly at the door, she would smile, and they would forget she was different. Evan noticed the shift long before anyone else. The girl who once trembled by the couch now teased him when he dropped a tray of glasses, or rolled her glowing eyes at his clumsy jokes. At night, in the privacy of his room, he thought of the way she smiled, the way she looked at him as though she could see more than what he showed. He buried those feelings, telling himself she was family, telling himself it was impossible. But Laura felt it too. Her telepathic gift had sharpened over the years, though she never intruded without need. Still, emotions radiated from Evan so strongly, sometimes they brushed against her like a warm breeze. It scared her and comforted her all at once. Then came the rumors. Traders spoke of unusual signals on the edge of the system, patterns too precise to be random. The council brushed them off as sensor ghosts, but Sarah wasn't fooled, and neither was Laura. She remembered the memories she had once forced into Sarah's mind, the chitinous monsters that had taken her parents. The Vespids weren't gone. They were waiting. One night, after closing the tavern, Laura stood on the walkway outside, her breath glowing faintly blue in the frozen air. Evan joined her, the silence between them heavier than usual. "Do you ever think," he asked softly, "that you were meant to find us? That night?" She tilted her head, glowing eyes meeting his. "On Nibelheim, nothing happens by accident. Survival is always choice." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. It was in that moment, beneath the stars and the endless storms, that Evan realized they were no longer children bound by chance. They were two souls, pulled together by fate, bracing for a storm far larger than any Nibelheim had ever thrown. And somewhere beyond the asteroid belt, something stirred. The council chamber was one of the few places on Nibelheim that ever felt truly warm. The heating grids were cranked to maximum here, not out of comfort, but necessity. Frostbitten fingers made poor decisions, and decisions were all this room dealt in. Evan and Laura sat side by side on the hard benches at the chamber's edge, both tugging at the stiff collars of the formal coats they rarely wore. He caught her eye, and for a moment it was like they were back at the tavern, whispering jokes over dirty mugs. But the weight in the air smothered any smile. Governor Gilbert rapped the table, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We're here because of Commander Hayes' report. Let's have it." The old soldier rose, shoulders squared, scars etched deep into his weathered skin. He tapped the control, and a holographic projection shimmered to life above the table. Red blips pulsed at the system's edge, steady, deliberate. At 0200 hours, long-range sensors detected 5 vessels holding position beyond the asteroid belt, Hayes said. Configuration and energy signatures match Vespid scouts. The chamber erupted. Voices tangled, some angry, some afraid. Could be traitors, one shouted. Sensor ghosts, another argued. Hayes slammed a fist against the table, silencing them. I've fought those bastards before. Don't tell me I can't recognize their signatures. They're out there, watching. Evan felt Laura tense beside him. He knew the look on her face. She had seen this before, years ago, in Fire and Blood. Slowly, deliberately, she stood. The murmurs hushed again. No matter how long she had lived among them, her presence always carried that edge of otherness, that aura that made people listen even when they didn't want to. This is reconnaissance, she said, her voice clear. The Vespids study their prey before they strike. They measure defenses, numbers, weaknesses. You have days, maybe less, before they test your shield. Your shield, Hayes corrected sharply. It's the colony's defense. But there was no heat in his words. He respected her, even if he struggled to admit it. Governor Gilbert leaned forward. Consultant Laura, you're certain? Laura's glowing eyes swept across the room. I watched them destroy my family. I know how they move. This is how it begins. The governor exhaled slowly, then looked to Hayes. Recommendations. Evacuation of non-essentials, he said without hesitation. Children, medical cases, key personnel. The rest prepare to fight. No? Sarah Parker's voice cut across the chamber like a blade. She stood near the back, arms folded, her tavern clothes still dusted with snow. You can't ask half the colony to stay behind and die while the rest run. Murmurs of agreement rose. Fear and fury mixed in equal measure. Laura raised a hand. The glow beneath her skin seemed brighter now, as though the storm outside had found a mirror inside her. There is another option. Before my people fell, we were building a countermeasure against Vespid weapons. It was stored at a research facility in the shattered plains Kororovish. The name sent a ripple of unease through the room. Everyone knew the plains. Jagged ice spires, sinkholes, storms that could swallow whole vehicles. Few who ventured there returned. Evan rose to stand with her. If it's there, we can find it. Bring it back. Give us a fighting chance. Hayes scowled. That's suicide. Kororovish eats expeditions alive. Then send people who've survived worse. Evan shot back. His voice cracked with something more than youthful bravado. It was the same certainty that had carried him to the door. That night years ago, Laura touched his arm, steadying him. We don't have the luxury of safe choices. Either we try, or we wait for the Vespids to burn this colony as they did mine. Governor Gilbert's eyes narrowed. She looked at the two of them, then at Hayes, then back again. The silence stretched until it felt like the air itself might crack. Finally, she nodded. Lieutenant Parker. Consultant Laura, you will form a retrieval team. Commander Hayes, prepare evacuation as contingency. This council is adjourned. The gavel struck, echoing like a death knell dot. As the chamber emptied, Sarah caught her son's arm. Her eyes were fierce, though her hand trembled. You don't have to do this. Evan squeezed her hand, then looked at Laura. The glow in her eyes reflected in his. Yeah, Mom, I think I do. And with that, the boy who once opened a door to save a stranger stepped into the role of the man who would fight to save them all. The mammoth rolled out from the colony gates like a steel beast built to challenge the gods of ice. 6 enormous wheels churned through the drifts, each rotation sending sprays of powder into the bitter wind. Inside, the 5-person team huddled in layers of thermal gear, the air thick with the growl of the engine and the unspoken awareness of what lay ahead. Evan sat near the forward viewport, eyes flicking between the shifting horizon, and Laura seated beside him. Even in the heavy insulated coat, her blue skin showed in glimmers at the collar and cuffs. Stress made the hue deepen, yet she held herself with calm resolve. When she noticed his gaze, she offered a small smile, as if to reassure him she was stronger than the storm outside. Captain Dean, grizzled and scar-lined, guided the vehicle with the precision of a man who had spent his life staring down bad odds. "Mag interference already scrambling nav," he muttered, tapping the console. "We'll have to trust landmarks once we hit the plains. I can guide us," Laura said softly. Her glowing eyes tracked the jagged skyline with a familiarity that unsettled Evan. "My people named this place Kororavesh. I've seen it before, though, only as a child clinging to my father's back." Torres, their security specialist, snorted. "Let's just hope your memory's better than the NAV grid." The mammoth lurched as it crossed from known ground into the shattered plains. Here, the land rose in violent fractures, massive spires of translucent ice stabbing toward the sky at impossible angles. Chasms yawned between them, dark and bottomless, their edges veiled by blowing snow. Each meter forward was a fight against terrain and physics. Hours crawled past. Evan found himself bracing against the seat more often, his eyes drawn again and again to Laura. She leaned forward, pointing out subtle ridges, slanted formations, or the faint shimmer of mineral veins in the ice. Dean obeyed her calls without argument every time they skirted disaster by meters. Once, the mammoth's front wheels punched through a hollow crust, tilting them toward a crevasse wide enough to swallow the vehicle whole. Dean's quick correction and Laura's shouted warning spared them, but the silence afterward was suffocating. By nightfall, the winds howled so hard the reinforced hull rattled. The team stopped in the lee of an ice tower. Ration bars passed around with grim efficiency. Inside the cramped compartment, body heat was both curse and blessing. Evan shifted closer to Laura, offering her half his blanket without thinking. She accepted, curling near enough that he could see faint light pulsing beneath her skin, as if her heartbeat itself glowed. Dr. Morgan noticed first. He held up a scanner, brow furrowing at the readout. "Your cells are resonating with the environment," he whispered. "The minerals in the plains, they're activating something latent in your biology." Laura glanced at her hands, watching light ripple beneath her skin like liquid fire. "It doesn't hurt," she said, voice trembling with awe. "It feels like remembering." The next day proved how real the change was. A sudden collapse sent a wall of ice crashing toward Torres. Evan shouted, but Laura moved faster. She grabbed the man by the collar and yanked him free with a strength no one had seen from her before. The slab smashed down, sending shards skittering across the snow where he had stood a heartbeat earlier. Torres stared at her, stunned. "How the hell did you?" "I don't know," she admitted, her glow brightening. "I just could." That night, in the storm-rocked mammoth, Evan held her close while the others pretended not to notice. She trembled not with fear, but with transformation, her skin pulsing with strange luminescence. Evan whispered against her hair, "You're changing." Laura looked up at him, her glowing eyes reflecting the light of the plains. "No," she said softly. "I'm becoming who I was meant to be." And though Evan tightened his arms around her, a chill threaded through him that had nothing to do with the storm. If she was becoming something more, something not entirely human, would she still choose him when it was over? Outside, the plains stretched on, endless and merciless. But ahead, buried deep within the broken land, waited the outpost that might hold their salvation or their doom. By the time the mammoth crawled back across the last rise, the sky above Niflheim was no longer gray, it was aflame. Streaks of sickly green energy carved through the clouds, each strike hammering against the shimmering dome that shielded the colony. The planetary barrier, once thought impregnable, now flickered and shuddered under the onslaught of Vespid weapons. Evan gripped the edge of the viewport, his throat tight. He'd seen storms tear at the colony walls, but this was war. Inside the vehicle, tension ratcheted to breaking. Torres checked his rifle for the 10th time. Captain Dean hunched over the controls, jaw set as he pushed the mammoth for every ounce of speed. Dr. Morgan clutched the portable drive that carried the countermeasure, data like a holy relic. Beside Evan, Laura's skin pulsed with blue light, so bright it illuminated the cabin. "They're here sooner than expected," Dean growled. "Shields won't last an hour." "Then we make it in less than that," Evan said, though his voice was raw. As they barreled toward the colony gates, a squadron of Vespid skimmers broke formation and descended. The insectoid craft moved with unnerving grace, their chitinous hulls gleaming in the dim light. Weapons charged, spitting lines of green fire that scorched the snow around them. "Hold on," Dean shouted. The mammoth bucked violently as he swerved, shocks groaning. One blast clipped their rear armor, sending sparks spraying inside. Alarms shrieked. "We'll never outrun them." Torres shouted. Laura's hand shot out, glowing fingers gripping Evan's arm. "The countermeasure, we can use it now. The mammoth's power core can emit a pulse." Morgan's head snapped toward her. "That could burn out every system we've got. We'd be dead in the snow." "It's our only chance," she said, eyes glowing like molten ice. Evan didn't hesitate. He met her gaze, nodded once. "Do it." Morgan and Laura scrambled to reroute the core, fingers flying over jury-rigged panels. The Vespid craft swooped closer, weapons spooling up for the kill. Evan braced himself, every nerve taut. "Now!" Laura cried. Blue energy erupted outward in a rippling wave, blasting from the mammoth like a shock pulse. The Vespid ships convulsed midder, their green lances sputtering out. Two crashed hard into the ice, the rest spinning away, systems scrambled. For a breathless instant, the night was silent. "Go!" Evan shouted. Dean floored the accelerator, the mammoth thundering through the gates just as the colony shield flickered dangerously low. The doors slammed shut behind them, locking out the storm and the swarm beyond. Inside the colony, chaos reigned. Families fled toward underground shelters, alarms blared, and soldiers rushed to the walls with weapons clutched in trembling hands. At the defense center, Commander Hayes met them, his uniform scorched and his eyes grim. "You have it?" He barked. Laura lifted the drive. It must be integrated into the shield generators. Technicians swarmed as she connected the device. Schematics unfolded across the display's alien designs, rendered in flowing lines and resonance equations too complex for most eyes. Laura translated with calm urgency, her voice carrying above the din. "Shift the emission frequency to this waveform. It will disrupt their neural networks." "But the power load, just do it." Hayes snapped. Minutes dragged like years. Outside, the Vespids pounded the failing barrier. Each strike dimmed the shield further, the protective dome trembling on the edge of collapse. At last, the system was ready. "Activate," Laura commanded. The generators roared. A surge of blue energy spread across the shield, cascading outward in waves. Through the viewport, the effect was immediate. Vespid ships faltered mid-flight, weapons falling silent. On the ground, insectoid soldiers jerked and spasmed, their movements breaking down into chaos. Cheers erupted through the command center, but it didn't last. Warning klaxons screamed as the colony's power grid spiked into the red. Systems failed in sequence lights flickering, consoles sparking. "The grid can't sustain it," a technician shouted. Laura's glow intensified, her face set with fierce determination. She pressed her palms to the console. "Then I'll sustain it." Evan lunged forward. No, you'll kill yourself. Her eyes, brighter than ever, locked on his. This is what I was meant to do. Blue light poured from her hands, threading into the circuitry. The countermeasure stabilized, its pulse holding steady as Vespid forces collapsed in disarray. Yet the strain was carving pain into every line of Laura's face. Evan's heart tore between awe and terror as he held her shoulder, whispering her name again and again. And then, just when it seemed the effort might consume her, the sky lit with a different light. Sleek ships, their design echoing the flowing curves of the research facility, slipped from hyperspace above NIFLHE. Evan gasped. Who? Laura's voice broke through the storm of energy. My people? They heard the call. The Luminary fleet opened fire, blue lances slicing through the crippled Vespid armada. For the first time in 10 years, hope blazed over Niflheim's frozen skies. The sky above, Niflheim burned with streaks of blue fire as the Luminary fleet carved through the Vespid formation. Where the countermeasure had crippled the enemy, Laura's people finished the work, their ships flowing through the air like blades of light. One by one, the insectoid vessels fell, crashing into the wastes beyond the colony's dome until only silence remained. Inside the defense center, no one moved at first. Technicians stared, stunned. Soldiers lowered their rifles, as though afraid the vision might vanish if they breathed too loudly. Then a ragged cheer rose, swelling into thunder as word spread. The Vespids were retreating. The colony had survived. Evan barely heard it. His whole world was narrowed to the woman slumped against him, her skin still glowing faintly where it touched the console. Laura's breathing came shallow but steady. Her hands trembled, though she managed to lift her gaze to his. You did it, he whispered, voice hoarse, her lips curved in the faintest smile. No, she murmured. We did. Then her eyes fluttered closed, exhausted but alive. When the Luminary ships descended, their hulls shimmering like living crystal, the colonists gathered in awe. Hatches opened, and beings with the same azure skin and glowing eyes stepped onto the frozen ground. Survivors, scattered for years, answering the beacon Laura had sent. Their leader bowed before Governor Gilbert, words carried in careful but practiced English. We return, not to conquer, but to stand beside you. Our enemy is yours. Our future, shared. It was the beginning of an alliance no one could have predicted. Humans and Luminari, bound together not by treaties hammered out in distant halls, but by survival, sacrifice, and a boy who had once opened a door dot in the weeks that followed. The shattered plains research facility was repurposed into a joint outpost, scientists and xenobiologists working side by side with Luminary engineers. The colony's defenses grew stronger than ever, woven from two civilizations' knowledge. The tavern Sarah Parker had built expanded too, its tables crowded now with both species laughing, trading, remembering what it meant to live. Max, grizzled and slower with age, became a legend in his own right, a dog who had first chosen trust over fear. Children traced his paw prints in the snow, calling him guardian of the colony. One rare clear evening, Evan and Laura stood together on the observation deck, the aurora shimmering across the sky in curtains of green and violet. He slipped an arm around her waist, the warmth of her body against him, grounding the enormity of what they had endured. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Finding me instead of your own people first? Laura turned her face toward his, her eyes glowing soft in the dark. Never. If Max hadn't licked my hands that night, if you hadn't brought me inside, everything would be different. The Vespids might have won. Evan chuckled, the old saying bubbling to his lips. Humanity fuck, yeah? Laura laughed, the sound like music in the cold. Humanity and Luminary fuck, yeah, she corrected, leaning closer. It wasn't as catchy, but Evan didn't care. He kissed her beneath the auroras, their breath mingling in the icy air. Below, the colony pulsed with new life, a beacon against the darkness of the galaxy dot. And it had all begun with a boy, a dog, and a knock at the door on the coldest night of his life.